All right. Hello, everyone. 안녕하세요. Uh, Hope you guys had a great winter vacation and you stay healthy and doing well. And welcome back to school. Unfortunately, the sweet winter vacation came to an end 3 days ago. Today is a March 4th, and so now we are back to school. I'm Chang-Koo, teaching the course Math Econ this spring semester. So we are going to study math together for one semester. That's going to be fun. Today is Thursday, March 4th. Uh, so the Thursday morning, and I have to say, I really apologize for the delay. I was supposed to upload this video yesterday morning, um, but as I noted in the course website, I was pretty occupied with moving. Uh, I didn't want to move into new apartment on the very first day this month because I knew that this may affect my teaching schedule and my other schedules. But uh, deciding moving date it was beyond my control, so I couldn't help it. Once again, it was not your business, but my business. But I'm really sorry for a delay. But uh, I promise this is never gonna happen again till the end of the semester. I'll do my best to be being more punctual for uploading videos. Okay, so from the next week, videos will be uploaded on my YouTube every Monday until 6 p.m. at the latest. Okay, all right. So I tried to finish recording this morning before going lunch and upload them as soon as possible so that you can watch and list some part of the videos before tomorrow's live lecture. Very good. All right. So this is the first week lecture slide, which is available in the course website. And the first 9 pages are concerned about the course procedure, and it contains a brief introduction about myself. But I think it's better to introduce myself Friday live lecture because it's pretty awkward to introduce myself, alone, just looking at the computer. That's really, really awkward. So let me introduce myself Friday, and it's better to talk about the evaluation and the other course procedures, especially you may wonder how to evaluate your performance in this course. I think it's better to talk about on Friday. Okay, so let me postpone them to Friday, especially the 9 pages of this first lecture slide. Those are about the brief introduction about myself and TA and the course procedure, and let me do that on Friday. Instead, in the first week video, uh, let me cover the first two chapters in our textbook, Fundamental Methods of Mathematical Economics, which is part one, so introduction. So chapter one is about the nature of our subject, mathematical economics, while chapter two introduces some, basic ingredients, ingredient of economic models, right? So in this video, let me cover chapter one, mathematical economics. Okay, cool. So in order to, before we address the question, what is mathematical economics? Let me first talk about economics. What is economics? So if I ask you, what do you think economics is? Then what is your answer? You know, um, so I guess most of you guys are sophomores or seniors or juniors or seniors. There are some senior students as well, but I checked the list of participants and found that most of the students are sophomores. So I suspect you guys already took principal class in list, so principle of micro and principle of macro economics. Uh, But so you guys know. So if you hear economics, supply, demand, and the equilibrium may pop in your head first of all, right? But in order to answer what is economics, let me go back to 1890, 18th centuries or 19th centuries, right? Late 19th centuries. So in 1890, Alfred Marshall, he's a British economist, uh, wrote a first textbook about principle of economics. Okay, so since Alfred Marshall, we have a chunk of textbooks about principle of economics, but those originated from Alfred Marshall. So Marshall's book is a very first textbook about principle of economics. Okay, and so if you study microeconomics, typical demand function is named after him. So we call demand function often Marshallian demand function. Okay, because of his contribution to establishment of basic classic theory, classic econ theory. But anyhow, in his influential book, Principle of Economics, Alfred Marshall defined economics as a study of mankind, what? A study of mankind in the ordinary business life. Okay? It's not a study of ordinary business life, but a study of mankind. So although Alfred Marshall narrowed down the scope to ordinary business life, still, it's a study. He defined economics as a study of mankind. This definition has a quite broad meaning, all right? So if we think about why Alfred Marshall defined economics like this, then we can find the answer from Gregory Mankiw's textbook. So if you took Principle of Economics and studied that subject with Mankiw's book, you may remember the very first chapter. In that chapter, Gregory Mankiw highlighted 10 major economic principles. Okay, so you may skip the first chapter because everybody knows chapter 1 is a introductory chapter, so it will not be on the exam. Also, I'm gonna skip. All right, but from my perspective, chapter 1 is the most important because it is a summary of the textbook. It's a summary of the entire book. It collects 10 major principles in economics. Okay, so if you own that book, I recommend you to read that again after studying Principle of Economics because that is a really nice summary of a Principle of Economics. All right. Anyway, so in that chapter, the very first principle states that in every economic problem, people face trade-offs. Okay, so we come up with a very important notion, very important concept in economics: trade-offs. So what is a trade-off? Trade-off means a situation. So trade-off refers to a situation in which if you make a one action, that induces one component to increase, but another component to decrease. So there is something going up, there is another thing going down. Okay, whenever you make an action, then so economics. Every problem in economics features this kind of a trade-off. Right? Let me take an example. All right. So if we think about the second example, so one firm considering to increase the price of its own product for sale. Okay. So then there is a important trade-off even in this simple example that can be well visualized by standard downward sloping demand function. So let me go to next slide. Then here is a nice demand function. Okay, and suppose that current situation is represented by this intersection. Okay, so the current price. So I put price on vertical axis, and quantity, so quantity produced or quantity demanded on the horizontal axis. That is quite a that is quite a conventional in economics. So we usually put on the y-axis and the quantity on the x-axis, right? And then draw a demand curve and supply curve, and we have a one intersection, and we call this point equilibrium. All right, but the current price is given by P star, and the quantity traded in the market, so quantity demanded and quantity supplied are equal to each other, and that is denoted by Q star. Okay, and suppose that the firm wants to increase the price from P star to P prime. Okay, then that leads to a very important trade-off in economics. I think if I after I explain this, you may remember. Oh, well, all right. 1 year ago I studied this, in Principle of Microeconomics class. Okay. Anyway, so if firm increase the price from P star to P prime, then what happens? Okay. So, you know, what happens to firm's revenue? Okay. Let me think about that question. Okay. If the firm increases the price, then what happens to firm's revenue? Okay. So first, we can easily anticipate firm's revenue may increase, especially revenue per sale. Okay, revenue per unit increases, of course, because the customers pay more for each unit. So the firm's revenue would increase. Okay, the increment of revenue due to this effect. So because the increase in unit price leads to increment of revenue that is captured by this rectangle. Okay, this pink rectangle, and this is what we call price effect. Okay, price effect on revenue. So the firm's revenue would increase by the area of this rectangle. All right, but there is a trade-off. So this is a good thing on the revenue, and there is also a bad thing, which is, naturally, if price goes up, people's demand for that product gets lower, right? So demand falls. And that reduces the firm's demand as much as the area of this rectangle, okay? This is what we call quantity effect. Right? I think you guys remember these two terminologies, price and quantity effect, in Principle of Microeconomics. So whether the firm's revenue increases or decreases actually depends on which effect dominates the other. If price dominates quantity, then the firm's revenue would increase, but the other way, the revenue goes the other way too, right? So this is a trade-off. Firm takes an action, increase the price of its own product for sale, but it has two countervailing effects on the revenue. So price effect increases revenue, but quantity effect decreases revenue. Of course, if the firm decreases the price, then price effect has a negative value, quantity effect, but positive value. But that is a typical example of a trade-off, what we mean by trade-off in economics. All right. And the third bullet point explains another important trade-off in economics. Whenever government designs a tax policy, so suppose that government increases labor income tax rate, all right? Then what happens to the whole economy? Because if a labor income tax increases, it means even if I work hard, a half of my income goes away, then of course that undermines my incentive to work, right? I don't have any more, high incentive to work hard, right? So that decreases efficiency, right? But at the same time, if the government, then the higher income tax means a higher tax revenue, and if the government uses that revenue to redistribution of wealth, then that improves, so that increases that improves wealth inequality, right? Wealth inequality. All right. So such a tax policy leads to important trade-off between efficiency and inequality. So whenever government designs a tax policy, it faces this trade-off, this kind of trade-off, right? So I guess you guys may have heard of these two important trade-offs if you took principle of economics class. All right. But this trade-off, does not exist only in the econ problem. If we think about a real world, or think about the first bullet point. So we have to decide, how to allocate our time. I have some time in the afternoon. Maybe I go, maybe I go to baseball stadium for watching baseball, or maybe I go to central library for studying. Right? We have to, we encounter this kind of a problem every single moment, right? And that also exhibits some kind of a trade-off, because if I go to baseball stadium, then I would miss time for studying, you know. So at the stadium, I may enjoy 3 hours for entertainment of myself, but I would lose 3 hours for studying. What is that? That is the concept of opportunity cost, which is another important concept in economics. But due to that concept, you know what? Because we can easily come up with such a opportunity cost corresponding to every action we make. So in the end, every problem has such a trade-off, right? In fact, this opportunity cost expands the boundary of economics substantially. So nowadays, everything is an econ problem. Every social problem can be thought of as an economic problem, because whenever we make an action, there is corresponding trade-off. All right. So now the boundary of economics is a pretty broad. So you may hear say political economics that addresses some political issues, environmental economics, resource economics, international economics, labor economics, and sports economics. You can put any word in front of economics, then that becomes a subfield of economics. So this is why Alfred Marshall defined economics as a study of mankind. Because whenever human being makes an action, it results in some certain kind of trade-off. But economics is all about trade-off. So what? Economics can be thought of as a study of human behavior. All right. So this is economics. Okay. Then in the next slide, going to next slide. So how do economists analyze an economic problem? Let's think about this issue. So how do economists analyze a trade-off? And economists employ one of two mathematical methods. The first method is to build up economic model. Economic model. So I'm going to explain that again in 15 minutes, I guess. But economic model is a simplified version of real world. Okay, it's a simplified version of real world. All right, and economists analyze economic problem in this first approach. By the way, that is called a theoretical approach. By building up simplified model and trying to get some insight from that. Okay, so this first method is called economic theory. All right. So what is a simplified version? So why do you have to think about a simplified version? Short answer is, real world is too complex. too complex to be analyzed. Okay, so think about the. So let me make an example. Think about the apartment price, in a large city. So if you live in Seoul, or if you live in Korea, or if you live in other countries, if you're interested in Korean news, you may have heard of soaring apartment prices in the last few years. At the apartment price in Seoul almost quadrupled and let's say tripled in the last 6 years. That is crazy. You know, I came back to South Korea last year, 2020 summer. And within just a 6 months. So now, this is a March. So I spent around 6 or 7 months in South Korea since the last summer. But in that, even in the time span, apartment price increased by I think 10% at least. It's crazy. It's crazy, right? Anyway, let's think about what factors influences this apartment price in a large city. Can you count them? Some factors. You know what? I can easily get you 10 factors right now. But in the real world, what factor affects the demand for apartment and the price of apartment? There are uncountably many factors, right? So factor one, let me draw some diagram. Factor one, factor two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight, nine, 10. There are uncountably many factors, and they are entangled, each other like a spider web, right? So think about it here in this diagram. One factor, increases. Say interest rate increases by, 0.5% in this time span or in this period. Then what's the effect on the apartment price right now? Okay, what's the effect of a increased interest rate on the apartment price? Using this diagram in the real world, it's almost impossible to analyze this issue. So the honest answer to this question is, nobody knows. You know, who expects, this epidemic situation, say 2 years ago? Who expected, who expected in advance? We are going to encounter this kind of, epidemic situation 2 years ago, early 2019. No one, right? So in the real world, we have a huge number of sources of uncertainty, right? So I can't even predict tomorrow. Then how can I predict this complicated situation? If the interest rate goes by 0.5%, what's the effect on the apartment price? Of course, the exact effect, the accurate 100% accurate effect is unknown to anyone. Right? So the answer is gonna be I don't know. That's quite a unsatisfactory, right? So what does economists do in this situation? Oh, they sort out. Although huge number of factors affect so have an impact on apartment price. Economists sort out, identify key important factors. Okay, so here, if you think about a apartment market, okay, if I have this question, I may choose first interest rate. Interest rate is a very important factor on the apartment price. Okay, so interest rate R. Okay, and let me choose a one more factor, that is a fertility rate. Okay, because a fertility rate determines a demand for apartment in the future, right? In the next generation. So that may affect, backward, the current demand for the current price of apartment. Okay, then I have three variables. interest rate, fertility rate, and apartment price. Okay? And then let me ignore the other factors. I know there exists a huge number of factors in the real world, but let me choose only three variables. And I want to see how these three components interrelate to each other. Okay? Of course, the interest rate may affect on fertility rate, family households' decision whether they have a baby or not, right? And fertility rate may affect apartment price, the other way, right? Okay, this is a starting point of economic model. Okay, choice of, so it begins with choice of key variables we are interested in, and then we examine what interaction happens in this simple world. Okay, so in this simplified version, now we can easily see the arrows. Okay, so if the interest rate changes, it has a direct effect on price. Okay, also has an indirect effect through fertility rate, right? This and this arrow. Okay, so that is well visible. Okay, now we think about that by building a mathematical model. Okay, and that's the way. That is a typical way economists analyze the economic problem by taking theoretical approach. Okay, that is economic theory. And the second method is use economic data. So after choosing, it begins with also a choice of a key variables. Okay, and I chose interest rate and fertility rate, and then we do have a data about these variables. We can easily see the trend of the past trend of interest rate. So the data of interest rate in the past, fertility rate in the past, and we can easily see apartment price. Okay, the data. We do have data about that. Okay, then we set up a econometric model or econometric model. So you're gonna study that kind of stuff in econometrics course. That is called. By the way, this second approach is called empirical approach. Okay, so empirical approach is something like first they are choosing variables, key variables, and then collecting data, and then using an econometric model. So economists try to gain some insight the effect on apartment price in this specific example. Okay, so we have two methods, right? And now let me answer what is mathematical economics. I talked more than 25 minutes, but finally, let me answer what is mathematical economics. Math econ is not a branch of economics. So unlike labor economics is a branch of economics. So it studies labor market only. So demand for labor, what determines a demand for labor and demand for supply, and the equilibrium wage, how equilibrium wage is determined, and how is a unemployment. So why unemployment rate is so high recently. That is a key labor economic. So that is a key issues studied in labor economics. Okay, and likewise, international economics studies a interrelationship between two countries. So trade, exchange rate. That is a keywords in international economics, right? So those are a subfield of economics. But math econ, although we put another word in front of economics, so math econ is not a branch. Rather, it is a mathematical approach. It indicates this mathematical approach itself. Okay. So mathematical economics provides a tool, provides us with tools, handy tools, uh, that used for analysis of several economic problems. Okay, so we saw one kind of tool in principle of economic class. That is this diagram, demand and supply diagram. Although there is no math here, okay, And this diagram visualizes how equilibrium is determined, if we have a demand curve and supply curve, and why equilibrium price is determined at, this intersection, why P prime is not an equilibrium price. We discussed so we can analyze this problem even with this simple demand and supply curve. Okay, so the mathematical economics. So in this course, math for econ, we go beyond this, simple diagram, and we are going to study several techniques such as linear algebra, calculus, and optimization theory. Okay, that's going to be fun. All right, all right. And finally, why we have to take a mathematical approach. In other words, why do economists use math in economics? In the short video I posted on the course website, David Mortensen, Nobel laureate in 2011, said, mathematics is a language for experts in science. Okay, I think that's the answer. Why we have to study mathematics. Okay, previously we discussed why we have to think about simplified version of real world. Why we can't just analyze a real world problem. Okay, why we have to study simplified version first? Because from simplified version, we can come up with a nice insight because everything is well visible, so it is a manageable, right? And then now in this slide, then why do we have to take a mathematical approach? Then, in other words, why do you use math in economics? The answer is math is a language for experts. So whenever experts would like to deliver their claims in a precise way, and they communicate what they want to say precise way, they use mathematics. Okay, so mathematics is just like English. Okay, many people misunderstand English is a common language all over the world. That is true. That is true because whenever which countries you go, you can communicate with English. But you know what? The common language I think is a algebraic numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You know what? Anyone, even my parents can't speak English at all, but you know, they can recognize the algebraic numbers very, very well. Everybody has a common sense about, number three, number four, number five, right? So, that delivers very, very clear message to people. So, this is why experts use mathematics for, to deliver their messages to society. Okay, because the experts like the precise thing, not confused ideas, but a clarified ideas. Okay. George Stigler. I put a George Stigler's quote at the bottom. He's another very, very famous, very influential economist, Nobel laureate as well in 1990s. He's a one representative of a Chicago school, University of Chicago. Anyway, he used to say mathematics has no symbols for confused ideas. Okay, so with the math symbols can be used to clarify ideas. That's why we use mathematics in economics. Okay, to clarify our ideas. All right, all right. Okay, then should I do this right now or? Yeah, let me go this. Because this is chapter 2, and section 2.1 is somewhat related to chapter 1. And we discussed almost everything. So, econ model is so in chapter 2 is about basic ingredients of economic models. Uh, but we already discussed what is economic model. Model is simplified description of reality designed to provide an improved insight into why the complex real world behaves the way it does. In addition, a model helps hypotheses about economic behavior that can be tested. So if we analyze economic model, we have a prediction, and that prediction is a exact is not a exact prediction about what society. So this has to happen in tomorrow or in 10 years, in 100 years. Okay, rather that is a hypothesis. Okay, so economic model provides such a prediction from a simple model, and then you, by taking empirical approach, we can test on whether that prediction is indeed true or not. Okay, and in the article, I posted it on the course website, uh, written by Harvarian. What use is economic theory? And in that article, Harvarian provided another several reasons, uh, why we have to study economic theory and what's the role of economic theory in economics. Okay, so here I emphasized only two. Economic model and economic theory provides a insight into the complex real world, and plus econ theory is a hypothesis about economic behavior, and that can be tested with data. And in addition, Harvarian provided several other reasons reasons why we have to study econ theory. Okay, so if you're interested, you may read that. But as I noted in the course website, has nothing to do with the exam. So you don't have to read them for the exam. Okay, it's just for fun. Okay, excuse me. So in this chapter, we are going to study basic components and the way to represent the relationship logically. All right. So, in models, we have variables. In the previous example, I showed you the apartment price example. We chose, the model is built. The way to build a model is, the very first procedure is to choose key variables, right? So of course, in economic models, we do have a bunch of variables. So what is variable? A variable is, do we have to define this? Variable is something that can take on different values, right? So the antithesis is a constant. Constant is the thing taking a fixed value. A variable is something that can take on different values. Plenty of examples in economy: price, profit, revenue, cost, national income, consumption, investment, etc. Economic model includes a set of variables, and okay, so this may be important. So we can subdivide the set of variables into two groups. So first, they are exogenous variables. They are the ones which are determined by external forces. And endogenous variables, they are the ones which are determined within the model. Okay. So what is endogenous, exogenous? So which variable is endogenous, exogenous depends on the economic question. All right. I have a one example here to explain this. So it depends on the scope of the model or the economic question itself. So how does, if we think about, so if we investigate, how does the demand for financial assets respond to changing the interest rate? Okay. Um, so think about the demand for stocks or demand for sovereign debt or demand for some other financial derivatives, call options, or put options, whatever. Okay, so how the demand for those assets respond to changing the interest rate? Okay, so if we investigate this question, suppose that Federal Reserve in the United States recently Federal Reserve decides to maintain the low interest rate. Okay, so we saw that kind of announcement in the newspaper. That is an exogenous variable. It is beyond our control because that is a decision of Federal Reserve in the United States, right? Let me show you one article. Right here. Okay. So, Federal Reserve cuts rates by 0.5 percent point to combat virus fear. All right. So this is in this example, the interest rate is an exogenous variable because something already happened, something already determined by some factor outside of the model. Because if we investigate this question, demand of financial asset, how it responds to changing the interest rate, then we already suppose that interest rate changed by interest rate has changed by Federal Reserve. Okay, so here a change in interest rate is a exogenous variable, but a demand for financial assets that will be determined in the model, which is a endogenous variable. Okay, endogenous variable. So in this question we study the relationship between financial assets and between interrelationship between demand for financial assets and the interest rate. And then if interest rate has changed, then what is the effect on demand for financial asset? That is determined within the model. So that is an endogenous variable. And then interest rate already changed. Okay, that is a external. That change is a external force, so it is a exogenous variable. But so here in this problem, we just examine the question from the perspective of household, investors, household or investors. So from the perspective of investor, Federal Reserve will change the interest rate. Then what should I do? Should I buy more stock or should I sell my current stock? Right? That is the question. But if we think about a Federal Reserve's question using a model, because when Federal Reserve determines a interest rate, they will take into account all this question. So how it affects how a change in interest rate affects a demand for financial assets, investors' behavior. So Federal Reserve take that into account when determining interest rate. And if we think about that model, from perspective of Federal Reserve, so how Federal Reserve have to determine the interest rate, okay, then that model, then these two variables are both endogenous. Okay, so previously, this question is in model. There are only investors, and then there was some external force that shock from the Federal Reserve. So Federal Reserve decided to change the interest rate. Then how they behave. So within the model, there are only investors. But in the second question, how does Federal Reserve have to determine the interest rate? Okay, so if we investigate that question, then in the model, Federal Reserve is not outside of the model anymore. It is inside. It is inside the circle. Okay. Now in our model, Federal Reserve also is an element of our model. So the interest rate becomes endogenous variable in the second question. Okay, that is what I mean by the scope of the model. So what is a endogenous variable? What is a exogenous variable? Depends on the question itself. Okay. This process. So in the first example, interest rate was a exogenous, but after accommodating Federal Reserve into the model, interest rate becomes endogenous variable. This process is called endogeneity. So we call endogenize one variable. Okay, so that means previously this variable was a exogenous variable, so we regard it as a external force, but now we expand the scope of the model. Okay, so Federal Reserve is now in the model, then interest rate becomes endogenous variable, and we call this process endogenizing one variable. In Korean, 내생화하다요. 변수를 내생화하다. In English, okay, endogenizing one variable. All right. So I think this is all about variables and equations and identities. So variables within the model interrelated by equations or identities. So going back to my apartment example, this arrow will be can be captured by one equation. Okay. So what's the law of equation and identities within a model that displays interrelationship between variables. Okay, and identity is a special example of equation. So it is the another name of identity is definitional equation. So identity means equation that defines one variable. Example is right here. We can define firm's profit as the difference between revenue and cost. Okay, and also, this is a typo, by the way. Here, revenue is also defined as the product of price per unit times a quantity sold. That is a natural definition of revenue. This is also identity, okay? Because it is a equation that defines firm's revenue, okay? And the second kind of equation is called behavioral equation. So I interpret it as this is the equation creating a link between variables. So one example is right here. Okay, so we define revenue here, profit. So we define profit and we define revenue. Then how do you define cost? Right, cost is naturally we can anticipate cost is a function of a quantity produced, right? So total cost is a function of a quantity produced. Okay, then we may build up. So we may come up with a one equation relating quantity produced to cost. Okay, this way. Okay? So that is a one example of behavior equation. Finally, characteristic equation is the one which we can derive from the model. So that is a so if you study principle of economics, characteristic equation is now we think of what is a optimal quantity which maximizes firm's revenue. Okay, so in order to maximize firm's revenue, how many units the firm has to produce? Then that optimal quantity is determined by this equation, MR equals MC, marginal revenue. So at the optimal quantity, marginal revenue has to be equal to marginal cost. That is a characteristic equation because from this equation, we can derive optimal quantity. So I took many examples from Principle of Economics. So while proceeding the lecture, I automatically presume you guys already took principles. But if you don't take principles, you don't have to. Even if you don't take principles, you don't have to worry about at all. I strongly recommend if you didn't take a principle class yet, I'd like to strongly recommend taking this semester. But even if you didn't take the principal class before, okay, it does not matter because this is a math class. So although I show you several economic examples, because this is a mathematic, it is mathematics, but this is mathematics for economics, right? So I'm trying to explain several concepts with a economic examples, but even if you didn't take a principle, it's totally fine, right? So by the way, let me explain. Let me finish my explanation. So, characteristic equation is the key equation uh, from which we can characterize endogenous variable as a function of exogenous variable. So, if we solve this equation, we can derive optimal quantity as a function of price. Okay, right? So that is a characteristic equation. Is it important to categorize equations into identities, behavior equation, and characteristic equation? No, not at all. It has nothing to do with economic analysis. That's just a way to set up equation and way to define variable. Hmm? So identity, once again, that is the equation that defines variable. Uh, so it is also called the definitional equation, and behavior equation is something like a cost function, so some function of another variable, so creating a link between variables. And finally, characteristic. From that, we can derive a optimal quantity. Uh, so characterizing the endogenous variable as a function of exogenous variables. All right. And finally, in section 2.2, we have a real number systems. So I guess you guys are quite familiar with this. Integers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or negative integers, -1, -2, and fractions, 1/4, so 1/4, or 2/3, these kind of things. So these two, so the union of these two becomes a rational numbers. So rational numbers takes a form a over b. Here a and b are integers. So the ratio of two integers is a rational number. An irrational number is a square root, or pi, the 3.14 used for used for computation circles circumference. Uh, uh, yeah, and so those are irrational numbers, and the real numbers is a the largest set. It contains a rational numbers and irrational numbers all together. Okay, so the common notation is we use this, script is curly R to represent the real numbers, and the M for a natural numbers. All right, it's a 53 minutes long video. So let me stop here. For the first video, I covered the up to section 2.2 or section 2.1, basic elements of a economic model. And in the next video, let me continue to work on the remaining section. The topics are pretty shallow. There's nothing sophisticated and nothing deep. So I think you guys can easily follow. All right. Thanks for watching and have a nice day.